When the letter arrived, it was thick enough to make a thud when it hit my porch. My dog Max growled at it like it might explode, and honestly, I didn't blame him. Anything with the HOA's logo, 3 smug oak leaves forming a circle, was usually a bad omen. But even I couldn't have predicted that this one would accuse me of altering regional airflow patterns. The letterhead looked official enough to belong to NASA, complete with diagrams of arrows swirling around my property. "Dear Mr. Miller," it began, "our contracted environmental engineer has determined that your recent wall reinforcement has caused significant disruption to prevailing wind currents, resulting in property damage to multiple neighboring lots." I blinked. Was this a joke? My reinforced walls were concrete retaining panels behind my garden, barely 6 feet high. I'd built them after last winter's storm had knocked over the old wooden fence. Apparently, according to the HOA, I had somehow managed to reprogram the wind. 3 micro-questions bounced in my head at once. How does one own the wind? Were they seriously blaming me for a breeze? And who the hell measures regional airflow in a suburban cul-de-sac? I read on. The letter demanded $10,437,000 in community damages for erosion, microdraft distortion, and increased pollen turbulence. $10 million. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped the paper into my coffee. The signature at the bottom belonged to none other than Karen Lutz, HOA president, self-appointed meteorologist, and self-righteous crusader of order. She lived 3 houses down in the pale yellow colonial that looked like it had been vacuum-sealed. Karen was infamous for her laminated bylaws binder and for saying things like, "We must preserve property values," as if she were reciting scripture. I decided to pay her a visit before my blood pressure spiked. She opened the door before I could even knock, arms folded, as if she'd been expecting me. "Ah, Daniel. I assumed you'd come storming over," she said, smirking at her own pun. "Karen," I said calmly, "you're telling me my wall, my garden wall, changed the wind?" "It's not about what you believe," she said, adopting that HOA meeting tone that made everyone's spine stiffen. "It's about what our environmental consultant found. You erected a structure without aesthetic approval, and it's created a vortex effect." "A vortex?" "Yes. A counterclockwise downdraft. My azaleas are dying because of it." I stared at her. "Your azaleas are dying because you spray them with so much pesticide they could survive a nuclear winter," I said. She narrowed her eyes. "You can either cooperate and cover the community's restoration cost, or the HOA will take legal action." I almost asked what law school she got her meteorology degree from, but I bit my tongue. "Fine," I said. "I'll handle it my way." That night, I went online and looked up aerodynamic impact of garden walls. The closest thing I found was a paper about skyscrapers redirecting wind tunnels in downtown Chicago. My 6-foot wall didn't even make the list. I printed out 10 studies, highlighted key points, and slept like a man ready for war. The next morning, Karen was already walking door to door with flyers about Daniel Miller's environmental vandalism. She'd even included a grainy photo of my yard with red arrows drawn in Microsoft Paint, swirling like a hurricane. Beneath it, the caption read, "Notice: residents may experience air pattern disturbances until restitution is made." I caught her at the mailbox. "You're distributing misinformation," I said, holding up one of her flyers. "It's community awareness," she replied, lips tight. "We have to protect homeowners from unintended side effects." "Like oxygen?" I asked. "Because I hear that's contagious." She scoffed. "Mock all you want, Daniel, but your structure is non-compliant. You'll be fined daily until it's removed." That night, I called the county inspector. After an hour of amused laughter, he came out to take a look himself. "Looks sturdy," he said, tapping the wall. "And it's well under the permit height." "So it's legal?" I asked. "Absolutely. Unless your HOA governs atmospheric physics, you're fine." I smiled. "Oh, you don't know Karen." 2 days later, she filed an official grievance. The HOA called an emergency board meeting. I attended with a folder full of scientific articles and a calm smile. The room was packed, neighbors whispering, some rolling their eyes, others genuinely curious about the Wingate scandal. Karen stood at the front, pointer in hand, gesturing at a blown-up chart showing arrows blowing from my property toward hers. "This man's wall has created wind shear patterns affecting lawn debris trajectories," she declared. I raised my hand. Question: what device did you use to measure debris trajectories? Our consultant used a handheld anemometer. Ah, I said, the same consultant who installed your sprinklers backward last summer? A few people chuckled. Karen's cheeks tightened. Daniel, your sarcasm doesn't change the fact that my hydrangeas have been leaning east since you built that monstrosity. I leaned back. Maybe they're just patriotic. The laughter grew louder. Karen's eyes flared. She banged her gavel, a thing she'd brought from home even though we weren't in a courtroom. You're in violation, Daniel. Remove the wall within 10 days or face escalating fines. What fines? I asked. She smiled like a cat about to pounce. $10,000 per day. The room went silent. Someone in the back whispered, "That's more than my mortgage." I took a slow breath. You're fining me $10,000 a day for wind? For unauthorized environmental modification, she said. Modification, I repeated. Karen, I poured concrete. Not magic. That earned another round of laughter. Even the treasurer, usually her shadow, hid a smirk behind his clipboard. Still, the board voted 4-1 in her favor. Only old Mrs. Reynolds, who had a soft spot for me after I fixed her fence last year, voted against. This is nonsense, she muttered, but the motion passed. I left the meeting with a fine notice and an overwhelming urge to test just how serious she was. By morning, Karen had taped another flyer on my mailbox. Wind zone hazard area, do not approach without proper eye protection. I couldn't make this up. Kids from down the street started calling my house the tornado factory. I decided to lean into it. I bought a cheap weather vane, a windsock, and a little wooden sign that said, "Caution, wind experiments in progress." Karen nearly choked when she saw it. "You think this is funny?" she hissed. "Very," I said. "At least I'm providing entertainment while you wait for your azaleas to recover from imaginary turbulence." She stormed off muttering something about calling a structural climatologist. 2 days later, an SUV rolled up with "Atmospheric Engineering Consulting" printed on the side. Out stepped a man in khakis holding a clipboard. "You Daniel Miller?" he asked. "Guilty," I said. "I've been hired to assess potential air displacement issues." "Let me guess, by a Mrs. Lutz?" He sighed. "You're not the first homeowner she's called me about." He measured wind speeds for an hour, frowned, and said, "Nothing abnormal. Unless she's allergic to mild breezes." I paid him $20 to write it up officially. When I handed Karen the report, she tore it up in front of me. "You think this piece of paper protects you? The HOA has authority beyond local contractors." "Oh," I said. "Since when do you outrank the atmosphere?" Her jaw clenched. "We'll see what the county judge thinks." I smiled. "We will." And as I walked away, the first gust of autumn wind swept down the street, scattering her precious flyers across every lawn. It wasn't poetic justice yet, but it was a start. 2 weeks passed, and I honestly thought Karen might have moved on to a new obsession, until a certified letter showed up claiming I owed $140,000 in accumulated HOA fines. That meant she had actually started enforcing her $10,000 per day threat. My first reaction was to laugh. My second was to check the HOA bylaws, just to confirm she was bluffing. But no, there it was, buried deep in Article 7, Section 4. The association may impose reasonable daily fines for ongoing violations. Reasonable, of course, being the key word. So I called an emergency meeting of my own, with my lawyer, Greg, A guy who wore Hawaiian shirts even in winter and had the emotional energy of a bulldog that had just smelled steak. He read the letter twice, then snorted. They want 10 grand per day for air currents? Apparently, I said. I should have installed a weather station instead of a wall. He leaned back. I've dealt with Karen types. HOA boards love overreach. We'll hit them with a cease and desist first. Make them prove wind alteration is real damage. 3 micro questions shot through my head. How exactly does one quantify a breeze? How much wind do I need to owe $1 million? And why did this suddenly feel like a court case about a science fair project gone wrong? Greg filed the notice the next morning, and that's when Karen went nuclear. She showed up on my driveway with her arms crossed, flanked by 2 board members. Jerry, who nodded at everything she said, and Trish, who kept scribbling notes like she was writing a gossip column. Daniel, Karen began, her voice clipped. You've escalated this unnecessarily. The community was willing to work with you. By fining me into bankruptcy? I said. You brought this upon yourself. We have documented evidence of wind-related damage. My patio umbrella snapped in half last week. Maybe because it's October and you live in a wind corridor, I said. She jabbed a finger toward me. Your wall is the corridor. Greg stepped in, calm but sharp. Ms. Lutz, unless you can demonstrate material damage directly caused by Mr. Miller's wall, your fines are legally baseless. Consider this your warning before we file harassment. Karen's jaw locked. You'll regret this, she said. Oh, Greg replied. I already regret standing here listening to this nonsense. They stormed off, and I thought maybe that would be the end. But Karen was nothing if not persistent. A week later, county inspectors arrived, 3 trucks full of them. I hadn't even called them. Karen had filed an official complaint with the state's Environmental Impact Review Board. Yes, she had somehow turned a neighborhood feud into a supposed environmental crisis. The lead inspector was an older guy named Howard who looked both exhausted and entertained. Sir, he said, we received a complaint that your wall is redirecting wind into neighboring properties at destructive velocities. I almost laughed again. Destructive velocities? This isn't the Grand Canyon, Howard. He smirked. We figured as much. Mind if we check anyway? I let them measure everything. They walked the perimeter, took photos, even released a small smoke puff to test airflow. After an hour, Howard shook his head. Everything looks standard. Wind speed on this street's consistent with baseline conditions. You're fine. Can I get that in writing? I asked. He grinned. You bet. It's not every day I get to clear someone of wind crimes. I posted the report on the neighborhood bulletin board the next morning with the headline, Officially Cleared of Wind Manipulation. Underneath, I taped a little drawing of a superhero cape fluttering behind a brick wall. Karen tore it down within an hour. But by then, the neighbors had seen it, and the tide began to turn. That weekend, my next-door neighbor Alex stopped by. Man, Karen's lost it, he said, holding a beer. She told me your wall's changing humidity levels now. Humidity? I said. That's new. Yeah. She says it's making her hair frizz. We both cracked up. But things took another twist a few days later when I found a city engineer standing by my property with a clipboard. He looked sheepish. I've been asked to check structural compliance, he said. Something about unauthorized seismic modifications? Seismic now? I said. First wind, now earthquakes? He nodded apologetically. The HOA submitted a report claiming your reinforced wall may affect ground vibration dispersion during storms. I stared at him. So, my wall might cause earthquakes. He shrugged. I know it sounds nuts. I just follow up on filed complaints. By the time he left, after finding absolutely nothing wrong, I realized Karen had crossed from petty tyranny into obsession. She wasn't just enforcing rules anymore, she was trying to win. The fines, the complaints, the flyers, it was all a battle for dominance, and she hated that I was laughing through it. The next HOA meeting was pure theater. Karen strutted in like a general returning from war. "We have new evidence," she announced. "The wind redirection has contributed to increased energy costs across the community. HVAC systems are overcompensating due to altered air distribution." I raised a hand. "So my wall is now attacking everyone's air conditioners?" She glared. "This is serious. Residents deserve compensation." I waited until she finished her slideshow, complete with more fake arrows and bar graphs, then pulled out the county report clearing me of any impact. "You're accusing me of weather manipulation, Karen. That's not enforcement, that's slander." The room buzzed. Even Trish stopped taking note. Karen turned red. "You can't talk to me like that." Greg, seated beside me, said, "Actually, we can. Because tomorrow morning, we're filing a counterclaim for harassment, defamation, and malicious fines. You've cost my client over $100,000 in emotional and financial stress." Karen froze. For a brief moment, I thought she might back down. Then she smiled, a tight, dangerous smile. "Fine. If that's how you want to play, we'll involve the insurance board. Let's see how your property value holds up when the HOA declares it a hazard site." That's when I realized she wasn't bluffing anymore. She genuinely believed she could destroy me through bureaucracy. 2 nights later, my homeowner's insurance agent called. "Hey, Daniel," he said cautiously, "we received notice from your HOA labeling your address as structurally non-compliant due to environmental concerns. Do you know what that's about?" "Oh, I know exactly what that's about," I said. "Look, it's nonsense," he continued, "but it triggers an automatic review. If it's not cleared fast, your premium could skyrocket." That was the final straw. The next morning, I filed an injunction. Greg helped me compile every letter, fine, and inspection report. We included the official findings from the county and the environmental board. Then we added photos of Karen's flyers, screenshots of her public posts, and witness statements from neighbors who'd watched her distribute them. By Friday, the case had reached the county civil court, and for the first time, Karen's smug confidence seemed to crack. That weekend, she sent me an email. The subject line read, "Let's resolve this amicably." Her message was pure condescension. "Daniel, I believe we both want what's best for the neighborhood. Perhaps we can come to a private agreement to avoid unnecessary embarrassment." I replied simply, "Karen, I believe in transparency. Let's let the judge decide." I hit send and sat back. For the first time in months, the air around my house felt calm. No fines, no inspectors, no flyers, just the quiet hum of a breeze moving naturally through the cul-de-sac. For now. Because if there's one thing I've learned about Karen Lutz, it's that she never surrenders a battle quietly. And deep down, I knew she had one last storm brewing. I should have known peace was temporary. The calm lasted exactly 9 days before the next absurd escalation arrived. It was a Saturday morning. I was halfway through my coffee when I heard what sounded like a leaf blower on steroids outside. When I stepped onto the porch, I saw a van labeled Aeroflow Environmental Consulting, HOA Contract Division. 4 people in reflective vests were setting up tripods and weather sensors around my property line. I walked up to the nearest guy and asked, "You folks measuring the wind again?" He looked awkward. "We were contracted by the Homeowners Association to conduct an airflow study." "Ah," I said. "The sequel." Karen appeared moments later, dressed like she was running a government experiment, clipboard, safety goggles perched on her head, and a smug smile that could curdle milk. "Daniel, this is a sanctioned evaluation. Please refrain from interfering." "I'm not interfering," I said. "Just observing your taxpayer-funded fan club." She ignored me and gestured dramatically toward the technicians. "We'll be running airflow simulations for the next 48 hours. I'd appreciate your cooperation in keeping pets and vehicles off the property." "Karen, this is my property." Her smile didn't budge. "The airflow doesn't respect boundaries." 3 micro-questions shot through my head. Was she quoting a bad sci-fi movie? How much HOA money was she burning on this nonsense? And how did no one else stop her? I decided to record everything. 2 hours later, I had video of her team placing industrial fans along her fence line, pointing toward my house, apparently trying to replicate directional currents. It looked like a low-budget hurricane movie. By afternoon, the neighbors were gathered to watch. Alex leaned on his truck, shaking his head. "She's gonna bankrupt herself trying to prove you control the wind." "She's close," I said. "All she needs is a wizard hat." That night, the fans kept roaring until almost midnight. When I finally stepped outside to ask them to stop, Karen shouted from her yard, "We're calibrating." "Calibrating what?" "Your ego. Environmental drift vectors." The next morning, I found a new letter taped to my door, an interim damage report. It claimed that the airflow simulations had resulted in a deviation spike of 22%, proving significant turbulence originating from structural interference. It also estimated additional community costs of $2.3 million. I laughed so hard my neighbor across the street thought I was choking. Greg, my lawyer, wasn't laughing. "She's building a paper trail," he said when I showed him the letter. "It's nonsense, but she's trying to overwhelm you with volume. Eventually, a lazy judge might just say, 'Settle this to make it go away.' So we make sure it doesn't go away quietly," I said. That week, Greg filed a motion to subpoena the HOA's financial record. If she was spending community money on airflow experiments, that was a violation of their own charter. He also requested disclosure of the so-called environmental consultant's credentials. Karen's reaction was nuclear. The following Monday, she called an emergency HOA meeting again, this time outdoors, right in front of my house. She stood on a folding chair, waving papers like a preacher. "Neighbors," she shouted, "we are under siege by an individual whose reckless construction has endangered our microclimate." Half the neighborhood rolled their eyes. The rest recorded her on their phones. I stepped onto my porch with my coffee, as calm as a man could be. "Karen, I'm flattered. Didn't know I controlled a microclimate. You mock science, Daniel, but your wall has disrupted airflow patterns, created eddies, and possibly influenced rainfall." "Rainfall?" I said. "You're blaming me for rain now?" She pointed dramatically. "Ever since you reinforced that wall, our side of the street has experienced puddling after storms." "Yeah, Karen," Alex called out from the crowd, "that's called gravity." Laughter rippled through the group. Karen's face flushed crimson. "This meeting is for residents concerned about community integrity." Someone shouted, "We are concerned about you." For the first time, I saw real cracks in her authority. She stammered, then shouted something about non-compliance fines before storming back into her house. But Karen never stayed quiet for long. 3 days later, an anonymous email landed in my inbox. "HOA president under investigation for misappropriation." The sender was anonymous, but the attached screenshots were very real. Transactions from the HOA account to a consulting firm matching the name of her brother-in-law's company. She'd been funneling money through Aeroflow Environmental Consulting. I forwarded it to Greg immediately. "This changes everything," he said. "If she used HOA funds for personal gain, that's embezzlement." We filed the evidence with the court. Within 48 hours, Karen received notice that she was being audited by the county HOA compliance board. I'll never forget the look on her face when I saw her at the mailbox that week. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something colder, harder. "You think this is over, don't you?" she said quietly. "I think the wind's finally changing direction," I said. Her lips curled. "Enjoy your little victory, Daniel. But if my reputation goes down, yours goes with it." She wasn't bluffing. That same night, I woke up to headlights flashing against my window. I went outside to find Karen standing by my wall with a measuring tape and a camera. "Karen," I called out, "you're trespassing." "I'm documenting proof before the audit twists everything," she snapped. I grabbed my phone and started recording. Smile for the evidence, then. She glared at me, then stormed off into the darkness. The next morning, I found spray paint on my wall, bright red letters spelling "Wind Thief." I filed a police report. The officer chuckled reading it but took photos anyway. "That's vandalism," he said. "Classic retaliation." When word spread through the neighborhood, the last few people still defending her started backing away. Karen had crossed into public humiliation. The HOA board called for an emergency election. Apparently, even Jerry and Trish had grown tired of her antic. But the night before the vote, Karen made one last desperate move. I got a call from Greg just before midnight. "Daniel, check your email right now." I opened it and saw a 300-page PDF labeled HOA v. Miller Community Damage Assessment. It was a monstrosity of graphs, photos, and fabricated data. At the end, it proposed a new lawsuit, this time not just for wind damage, but for psychological distress caused to neighboring residents by continuous turbulence. "She's suing me for giving people anxiety?" I said. Greg sighed. "She's trying to delay her own audit by framing herself as the victim." I felt something cold settle in my chest. Karen wasn't fighting to win anymore, she was fighting to burn everything down. The hearing came faster than expected. The courthouse was small, half filled with neighbors who wanted front-row seats to the drama. Karen arrived wearing a navy blazer and an expression of martyrdom. Her lawyer, a twitchy man who looked like he'd been paid in HOA coupons, carried the 300-page report like a sacred text. When the judge took his seat, Greg handed him our evidence. The county inspection reports, the environmental clearance letters, and, most importantly, the anonymous email showing her embezzlement trail. Karen's lawyer began with flair. "Your Honor, this case is not about personal vendettas. It's about one homeowner's reckless disregard for community safety." Greg stood. "Your Honor, it's about one HOA president weaponizing bureaucracy to punish a neighbor who built a legal wall." Karen took the stand first. Her testimony was an emotional tornado. She talked about dying azaleas, emotional distress, airflow anomalies, and how her once peaceful mornings were filled with unsettling gusts. When it was my turn, Greg asked me just one question. "Mr. Miller, what do you believe is the real motivation behind these accusations?" I looked at Karen. "Control," I said simply. "She doesn't want order, she wants obedience. The moment someone stands up to her, she invents a new rule to crush them." For a moment, the courtroom went completely silent. The judge leaned forward. "Ms. Lutz, I've reviewed every document. Your claims are unsupported, your expenditures unauthorized, and your conduct toward this homeowner borders on harassment." Karen's face went white. He continued, "I'm dismissing the HOA's case. Furthermore, I'm approving the defendant's counterclaim for damages. The association will reimburse Mr. Miller's legal costs in full." The gavel hit the desk like thunder. It should have been over. It should have been the ending. But as I left the courtroom, Karen stopped me in the hallway. Her voice was low, trembling but dangerous. "You think this makes you the hero, Daniel? You embarrassed me in front of everyone. You'll regret it." I walked past her without responding. But even then, a part of me knew she wasn't bluffing. Because Karen wasn't finished fighting the wind. She was about to start making it. By the time the gavel had fallen and Karen's HOA empire officially crumbled, I thought the war was over. The board was dissolved, the fines voided, and the county had frozen all HOA accounts pending audit. But if I'd learned anything about Karen Lutz, it was that humiliation only made her creative. It started subtly. Mail began disappearing. Packages would show as delivered, but never arrive. Then one morning I found my garbage cans tipped over and filled, not with trash, but with copies of the lawsuit documents I'd filed against her. Someone had clearly driven by, dumped them, and left tire marks on my driveway. I installed new cameras, wider angle, infrared, motion sensitive. The next night, the footage caught a shadowy figure walking along the edge of my wall at 2 a.m., holding what looked like a hairdryer. The next morning, I discovered scorch marks on the concrete. I sent the video to Greg. "She's back," I said. He sighed. "Karen's ego doesn't retire easily. But if she's physically trespassing again, we can escalate." I didn't want to jump to police involvement yet. There was a strange satisfaction in letting her trap herself. 3 micro-questions crossed my mind. Why was she still obsessed with the wall? How much lower could she possibly sink? And what, exactly, was she trying to prove this time? The answer came 3 days later. I woke up to a thundering roar outside, like a leaf blower but far louder. When I stepped outside, I froze. Karen had rented a wind tunnel. A literal industrial wind tunnel. It was mounted on a flatbed truck parked in front of her yard, aimed directly at my property. She stood beside it with a clipboard and a triumphant grin. "We're conducting a wind replication experiment," she shouted over the roar, "to gather new evidence for appeal." "You're blowing a jet engine at my house," I yelled back. "It's community science." Half the neighborhood had come out to film by now. Alex was laughing so hard he nearly fell off his porch. "Karen's gonna take flight at this rate." One of the contractors looked uneasy. "Ma'am, I don't think this is legal without a safety permit," he said. Karen glared. "It's for public good. Document everything." Then, because karma loves timing, the wind tunnel's base slipped off the truck's platform. The machine tilted and blasted full force into her own front yard, ripping up mulch, scattering lawn ornaments, and toppling her "Welcome to our peaceful community" sign. The roar stopped abruptly when the operator killed the power. The silence afterward was almost holy. Karen stood frozen in a storm of her own making, her perfect hairstyle now a frizzy cloud. I couldn't resist. "Looks like the wind finally took your side, Karen." Her glare could have melted steel. "You think this is funny?" she shouted. "Deeply," I said. "And very well documented." By evening, the video was everywhere. Someone had uploaded it to the neighborhood group chat, and within hours it hit local social media pages. The comments were brutal. Karen discovers Newton's third law. Local HOA president recreates tornado, loses own lawn. Nature finally retaliates. The next morning, a city official showed up at her house with a citation for unauthorized use of industrial machinery in a residential zone. I thought maybe, just maybe, she'd finally surrender. But humiliation only made her more erratic. The very next week, I received a formal notice, not from the HOA, but from a newly formed entity called the Neighborhood Integrity Committee. Its logo? 3 leaves and a swirl. Karen had created a new HOA. I burst out laughing. She resurrected it under a new name? Greg shook his head. Legally, she can't enforce anything until it's registered. But she can certainly pretend to. And pretend she did. She sent glossy pamphlets titled "Rebuilding the Atmosphere," a community initiative claiming her mission was to reverse the environmental damage caused by rogue construction projects. My wall, apparently, was Exhibit A. Her newsletter even claimed she was working with regional meteorologists to prove a suburban airflow anomaly. That night, Alex came over holding one of the flyers. "Dude, this woman's officially lost her mind. Look, she's selling wind mitigation kits. It's just fans and scented candles." I stared at the flyer. "She's monetizing the wind." "Yeah," he said, "at $50 a set." Sure enough, I started seeing little plastic fans and spinning garden pinwheels on people's lawns. Some were genuinely amused. Others just didn't want to be on her bad side. But I had a different idea. I decided to build my own community experiment. Over a weekend, I ordered a small weather monitoring station. Temperature, humidity, wind sensors, the works, and set it up near the wall with a sign that read, "Real data, zero drama." Within 2 days, my little weather station had become a neighborhood tourist attraction. Kids came by to check the readings, and adults stopped to take pictures. It was harmless, factual, and, most importantly, mocked Karen without saying a word. She hated it. One afternoon, she stormed across the street, demanding I take it down. "You're trying to undermine my research," she snapped. "By measuring the actual weather?" I asked. "You're confusing people with conflicting data. That's called science, Karen." She jabbed a finger at me. "I'll have you cited for unauthorized meteorological installation." "Be my guest," I said. "It's solar-powered. If you can find the sun in your world of storms, go ahead." She stomped away, muttering something about consulting state climatologists. For the next few days, things went quiet, until a local news van showed up. Apparently, Karen had contacted Channel 5 to report a wind crisis in our community. I watched from my porch as she gave a full interview, complete with dramatic hand gestures and pseudoscientific terms. "The data shows disturbing turbulence patterns originating from one property," she said solemnly. "Our goal is to protect residents from unpredictable airflow events." When the reporter approached me for comment, I smiled and said, "My wall doesn't generate wind. Karen does." The segment aired that evening. The headline? "Wind Wars. HOA Battle Blows Out of Proportion." The comments online were savage. Karen became an instant meme. Someone even photoshopped her riding a tornado with the caption, "The Wind Whisperer." But for me, the real storm was brewing quietly. Because while the neighborhood laughed, Karen was quietly appealing the court's decision. She had hired a new lawyer and was preparing to file a federal complaint, claiming my property modifications violated the Clean Air and Atmospheric Flow Preservation Act. Greg read the document twice and said, "Daniel, I've seen nonsense, but this is creative. She's invoking environmental law. She's moving from HOA to Washington?" Essentially. And somehow it worked, at least in part. A regional EPA office actually sent a letter saying they'd received an inquiry regarding structural interference with natural air movement and would be conducting a preliminary review. Karen had somehow dragged the federal government into our suburban Cold War. By that point, even the neighbors were panicking. "Is this serious?" one asked me. "Could we all get fined?" I reassured them. "No. The EPA's going to laugh it off. Trust me." Still, when the inspectors arrived, clipboards, wind meters, government badges, the absurdity felt surreal. They examined my wall, took readings, and finally said, "We're here because someone filed a complaint claiming wind direction was altered by man-made obstructions. We're obligated to check, but this looks like standard suburban terrain." "Do you get many cases like this?" I asked. One inspector grinned. "This is a first." They concluded, of course, that there was no measurable alteration. They even asked if they could use the footage for internal training, as an example of frivolous community claims. I said, "Please. Let the world learn from Karen." When the report arrived, it was the final nail in her coffin. It stated, in dry bureaucratic language, that no evidence supports structural influence on local airflow patterns. I posted a copy on the community board again, same spot where I'd posted the first one months ago. This time, the headline read, "EPA confirms, wind still free." By nightfall, everyone had seen it. Karen's last line of defense, her last illusion of scientific authority, collapsed. But I knew her. She wasn't done yet. Because when control slips through her fingers, she doesn't let go, she rebuilds. And as I stood there that night, feeling the soft breeze drift lazily over my property, I saw her silhouette across the street, motionless, watching, calculating. The wind had finally gone quiet. But the air felt charged. Like something was about to blow. The morning after the EPA report dropped, the neighborhood felt lighter, like a literal weight had lifted off the air. Kids rode their bikes past my driveway again, the mail finally arrived on time, and the HOA sign at the entrance, once proudly bearing Karen's name, had been quietly removed. For a few blissful days it felt like the storm had passed. But then the quiet started feeling unnatural, like the calm eye of something larger. I caught glimpses of Karen through her window, pacing, phone in hand, papers stacked high around her kitchen table. She wasn't defeated. She was planning. The first clue came when construction equipment appeared across the street. A small team began unloading massive panels, steel poles, and crates labeled Aero Barrier Technologies. I watched for a while before walking over to the foreman. "What's going on?" I asked. He checked his clipboard. "Wind deflection wall. Ordered by a Mrs. Lutz." I laughed. "She's building a wall to stop my wall?" He shrugged. "Hey, we just install." By evening, the skeleton of Karen's new creation loomed over her front yard, taller than mine, coated in reflective panels that caught the sun like a mirror. She even installed rotating vanes on top, apparently to redirect airflow safely. It was absurd and a little terrifying, like she'd built a suburban fortress. That night, Alex texted me. "Bro, she just built a wind wall to block your wind wall. You can't make this stuff up." 3 micro-questions flickered in my head. Was she trying to prove something, or just reclaim her power? How far would she take this architectural arms race? And, most importantly, how much longer before it all literally came crashing down? It didn't take long. 2 days later, a heavy storm rolled in. Gusts whipped through the neighborhood, rattling fences and bending tree branches. From my porch, I could see Karen's massive metal wall groaning under the pressure. I recorded a video just in case. At 9:17 p.m., one of the top panels snapped loose with a metallic shriek and flew straight into her yard, smashing her garden lights and bending her mailbox. I ran over immediately, rain pelting down, shouting, "Karen, you need to shut that thing down." She was in her driveway, clutching her clipboard like a shield. "It's fine. It's working. It's about to work its way into your house." Before she could answer, another gust tore through, this time knocking 2 entire sections of her wind wall backward, directly into her front porch railing. The crash echoed through the street. The storm lasted another hour, and by the time it ended, her yard looked like a scrapyard of twisted metal and splintered posts. My wall, quiet, solid, and unmoved, stood exactly where it had always been. When morning came, half the neighborhood gathered to inspect the damage. Karen stood amid the wreckage, soaked, furious, and humiliated. "This," she declared, "proves how dangerous unregulated airflow is." "Karen," I said, "it proves that aluminum sails don't belong in residential zones." She ignored me, already on the phone with someone. "Yes," she said into the receiver. "I need to file an emergency disaster claim, community atmospheric failure." The insurance adjuster arrived the next day, looking more confused than concerned. "Ma'am," he said after inspecting the wreckage, "this wasn't an atmospheric event. This was a structural collapse." Karen folded her arms. "Caused by redirected wind." The adjuster turned to me. "Your wall was fine?" "Still standing," I said. He scribbled notes and left without another word. Later that afternoon, she filed another complaint, this time with the National Weather Service. She claimed her house was in a localized turbulence zone and demanded government compensation. I thought she'd finally hit rock bottom. I was wrong. A week later, my phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. "Mr. Miller?" a voice asked. "This is Sergeant Thompson from the County Emergency Response Unit. We received an anonymous report that your property contains illegal storm defense equipment. We're required to inspect." I almost choked on my coffee. "Illegal what?" When they arrived, they looked as bewildered as I felt. Karen stood at the edge of her yard, arms crossed, watching like she'd just set a trap. "There," she said, pointing at my retaining wall. "That's the structure in question." Thompson examined it, then turned to me. "This is concrete." "Exactly." He sighed. "We'll file it as a false report." When they left, Karen's mask cracked. "You think you've won," she hissed. "You embarrassed me in front of my neighbors, the media, and the government. But when the community votes, they'll see what kind of person you really are." Community vote? I asked. She smirked. Neighborhood integrity elections next month. You'll see. Apparently, she was reforming her Neighborhood Integrity Committee into an actual registered organization, and she was running for president again. I couldn't decide if she was delusional or unstoppable. Maybe both. Greg, on the other hand, saw an opportunity. If she's registering a new HOA, we can file an injunction immediately based on her misuse of funds from the last one. She's under audit, she can't hold public office. He filed the paperwork within days. But Karen wasn't backing down. She canvassed door to door, promising residents better air quality, storm protection, and neighborhood harmony. Somehow, a few people actually bought into it, mainly the ones who missed the old HOA structure. So I decided to counter her campaign the only way she couldn't match: facts and humor. Alex and I printed signs that read, "Make wind free again," and planted them all over the neighborhood. We hosted a backyard barbecue under a banner that said, "Calm air, calm lives." Even Mrs. Reynolds brought her famous pie and said, "I never liked that woman anyway." Karen's fury was visible from across the street. She started patrolling her lawn with a walkie-talkie, whispering to whoever was on the other end about evidence gathering. The night before the election, I caught her sneaking around my side yard again. This time, she was holding what looked like a handheld anemometer and a flashlight. I stepped out quietly and said, "Looking for the source of the wind or your sanity?" She jumped, nearly dropped the device, then hissed, "You think this is over? You'll be exposed tomorrow." "Karen," I said calmly, "tomorrow's not about wind. It's about people finally breathing easy." She glared but said nothing. The next day, the vote took place at the community center. Karen showed up in a blazer again, flanked by her few loyal followers. I arrived in jeans and a smile. The air felt thick with anticipation. She gave a passionate speech about restoring environmental order and holding offenders accountable. I gave a short one about moving on from nonsense and getting our lives back. When the votes were counted, the results weren't even close. Karen lost 58-3. She stood there frozen as the new committee chair. Alex, of all people, announced, effective immediately, all pending fines, claims, and restrictions are void. Our neighborhood officially recognizes the Miller Wall as a permanent, compliant structure. The crowd clapped. I saw a few people actually tear up, laughing and hugging. For the first time in months, the tension that had gripped our little community dissolved. Karen, however, didn't move. She stared straight ahead, lips trembling, then turned and walked out without a word. I should have felt triumphant, but something about the silence she left behind unsettled me. Because Karen didn't lose quietly. When she vanished for 3 days straight, people thought she might have left town. But on the fourth night, I woke to a strange humming sound coming from her property. I looked outside. Her yard was glowing. Rows of industrial fans, huge ones, lined the fence, all pointing toward my wall. She'd built a makeshift wind tunnel again, only this time fully automated. Wires ran into her garage, connected to what looked like a massive generator. And as I watched in disbelief, she threw a switch. The fans roared to life, shaking the trees, rattling my windows, and sending dust swirling through the street. I stepped outside into the gale, my voice barely audible over the roar. "Karen, turn it off." She stood in her driveway, hair whipping in every direction, shouting back, "Let's see how your wall handles real wind." It was insanity, pure, terrifying insanity, and I realized then that this wasn't just about control anymore. It was obsession. And whatever was coming next, it wasn't going to end quietly. When the roar of Karen's fan army filled the neighborhood that night, every window on the street shuddered. The sound wasn't like ordinary wind. It was mechanical, guttural, almost angry, like a jet engine stuck in a loop. The whole cul-de-sac was vibrating, and the dogs were barking in chorus. I threw on a jacket and sprinted outside. The air itself felt weaponized, hot gusts slamming into my face as leaves and debris whipped past. Karen stood there in her driveway, arms spread wide like a storm goddess, hair flying, eyes wide with manic triumph. "You can't stop progress, Daniel," she yelled over the roar. "This is what real airflow regulation looks like." I cupped my hands and shouted back, "You're going to blow a transformer. I already calculated the safe threshold." "Based on what, your horoscope?" She ignored me and cranked the generator even higher. The fans screamed, their motors straining. The power lines above us started to hum and sway. I could see light flickering in several houses as circuits overloaded. Alex came running from across the street, holding a flashlight. "She's gonna fry the grid." "Already on it," I said, pulling out my phone and dialing emergency services. When the dispatcher asked what was happening, I hesitated before saying the words out loud. "Yes, ma'am, my neighbor has set up a wall of industrial fans and is using them to attack the wind." There was a pause. "Sir, what?" "Just, please send someone before she takes off like a helicopter." By the time 2 police cruisers arrived, the street looked like a movie set in the middle of a hurricane. One officer had to cover his face just to get close enough to shout at Karen. "Ma'am, turn the machine off." She screamed something about federal air safety rights and refused. That's when it happened. A blinding flash erupted from her garage. The generator had overloaded. Sparks burst across her driveway, and one of the fans exploded with a sharp metallic crack. The roar stopped instantly, replaced by the whine of spinning metal coasting to a stop. The silence afterward was eerie. Karen stood there, frozen, staring at the smoking wreck of her invention. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked genuinely shaken, not furious, not smug, just lost. The officers approached carefully. "Ma'am, we're shutting this down. You're lucky no one got hurt." "I was proving something," she whispered. "Yeah," one officer said dryly, "that gravity still works." They made her power everything down and taped off the area. I offered to send them the footage from my security cameras, but they just sighed and said, "Please do. Our sergeant's never gonna believe this." When the police finally left, Karen stood in her yard alone. For a long time, she didn't move. Then she turned toward me and said quietly, "You think this is over, don't you?" I didn't answer. I just walked back inside, shut the door, and sat there in the dark while the adrenaline wore off. 3 micro-questions rolled through my head. How did this woman still have the energy to fight? What was she trying to win anymore? And was this obsession going to stop before someone actually got hurt? The next morning, the street was buzzing, literally and socially. Someone had already posted a video of the fan incident on social media. By noon, it had thousands of views. The title: "Crazy HOA Lady Tries to Control the Wind, Blows Up Her Yard." Neighbors came by in waves. Mrs. Reynolds knocked first, holding coffee. "You know, Daniel," she said, "I used to think you exaggerated. But now I think she needs, well, professional help." "I don't disagree," I said. Even Jerry, her old right-hand man, stopped by later. "She's gone too far," he muttered. "She called me last night asking if I had a license to operate atmospheric machinery." "You don't." I deadpanned. He cracked a weak smile. "Not since the last hurricane." The city inspectors arrived again that afternoon. Apparently, the police report had triggered a full safety audit. They cordoned off Karen's driveway, inspected the burnt-out generator, and finally declared her entire setup a hazardous environmental experiment. When she tried to argue, they handed her a $25,000 fine for unauthorized power usage and reckless endangerment. That should have been the end. For anyone else, it would have been the end. But Karen wasn't wired like other people. She disappeared for almost 2 weeks. No cars, no porch lights, no sign of life except the occasional rustle behind her blind. I started to relax again, almost believing she'd left town for good. Then one night, my motion cameras picked up movement near the fence. I checked the footage and froze. It was Karen. She was sneaking into my yard again, this time carrying what looked like a small drone. She set it down near my wall, pressed a button, and sent it buzzing up into the air. It hovered for a moment, then began drifting back and forth over my property. The next morning, I found the drone sitting dead in my grass, its battery drained. A sticker on the side read, "Atmospheric Monitoring, Property of the Neighborhood Integrity Committee." I brought it inside and pulled the memory card. The footage was bizarre. Hours of steady, silent video showing nothing but my yard, the sky, and my unmoving wall. But halfway through, I spotted something chilling. Karen's voice, faint but clear, documenting evidence of abnormal turbulence. "Miller thinks he can hide it, but the air doesn't lie." I handed the footage to Greg. He looked incredulous. "She's spying on you with drones now?" "Yep," I said. "Apparently, the air's under surveillance." He rubbed his temples. "All right, we're done playing defense. We're filing for a restraining order." The process was quick, and within days the judge approved it. Karen was legally barred from coming within 50 feet of my property. When the deputy delivered the paperwork, she ripped it in half right there on her porch. "You can't stop me with paper," she screamed. "You think you own the air, but the air is everywhere." The deputy just muttered, "Ma'am, please don't say that like it's poetry," and walked away. For the next few nights, she stayed quiet. But then, around midnight one evening, my phone buzzed with a neighborhood alert. "Emergency power outage. Grid instability reported near Windridge Lane." My stomach dropped. I looked outside and saw it, her house glowing faintly blue, lights flickering inside like a lightning storm. I ran out and saw her garage door open. Inside was another contraption, smaller this time, but surrounded by wires, sensors, and what looked disturbingly like car batteries linked together. "Karen!" I yelled. "Stop. You're going to electrocute yourself." She turned to me, sweat glistening, eyes wild. "I figured it out, Daniel. The frequency of air pressure changes. It's harmonic. My machine can prove it." Before I could say another word, there was a sharp pop, and every light on the street went dark. The machine sputtered, sparked, and went dead. The silence afterward was so total it hurt my ears. I ran over, half expecting to see smoke or worse, but she was standing perfectly still, staring at the dark, lifeless device. "It doesn't make sense," she whispered. The wind stopped talking. The next morning, an ambulance came quietly. Her sister, who'd apparently been contacted by the authorities, showed up to sign paperwork. Karen didn't fight. She walked out calmly, eyes blank, muttering something about unfinished data. The neighborhood watched in silence. For the first time in months, I didn't feel angry. I just felt tired. When the van pulled away, Alex put a hand on my shoulder. "You think she'll be okay?" "I hope so," I said. "Everyone deserves to breathe easy eventually." The city came out a week later to remove the wreckage. Fans, generators, wires, all of it. The scorch marks on the pavement faded with time, and the wind returned to what it had always been, just wind. But even now, sometimes at night, I swear I can hear the faint hum of a fan somewhere in the distance, like an echo of the storm she'd tried so hard to control. And part of me wonders, as the breeze brushes past my wall, was it ever really about wind? Or just the need to feel like she could move something bigger than herself? After Karen was taken away that morning, the neighborhood seemed to exhale for the first time in months. The silence felt strange at first. No echoing gavel bangs, no late-night engine hums, no paper notices taped to my mailbox. Just wind. Real, natural, innocent wind. I thought that would be the end of it. But stories like ours don't end neatly. They taper off like a storm that refuses to fully die, leaving behind wreckage and questions you don't want to ask. For 3 weeks, life returned to normal, or close enough. The new Neighborhood Integrity Committee dissolved itself, Alex mowed his lawn without someone measuring the grass height, and Mrs. Reynolds baked an apple pie as a symbolic peace offering to the atmosphere. The joke made everyone laugh. For once, we all felt united. Then one morning, I found an envelope in my mailbox. No stamp. No address. Just my name scrawled in handwriting I instantly recognized. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Daniel, it read. You'll be pleased to know they've released me early. The doctors say I'm stable. They don't understand, of course. None of you ever did. But the truth has a way of blowing back eventually. Keep your wall strong. You'll need it. I stared at the note for a long time. The handwriting was calm, deliberate, not the erratic scrawl I expected. But there was something chilling about that last line. You'll need it. I called Greg immediately. She's out. He paused. Already? That was fast. What do you want to do? Keep documenting everything, I said. Because if she's learned anything, it's not to make noise until she's ready. For a few days, nothing happened. No sightings, no calls. I almost convinced myself she'd moved away, until I noticed a new listing on the community website. Someone had purchased the abandoned property directly behind my lot. The name on the deed? K. Lutz Holdings LLC. 3 micro-questions flashed through my mind. Was she seriously setting up shop behind me? What did Holdings LLC even mean? And was this round 2 or something worse? Within a week, trucks started arriving, quietly this time. No banners, no logos. Just unmarked vans unloading boxes and equipment at the property line. The workers never said much, and when I asked one what they were building, he shrugged and said, storage units. Private contract. I didn't buy it. Not for a second. That night, I climbed onto my shed roof with binoculars. Under the pale glow of a work light, I saw metal scaffolding and, unmistakably, what looked like turbine housings. Smaller than her old machines but built with precision. This wasn't another chaotic backyard project. This was organized. I called Greg again. She's back. And this time, it looks professional. He groaned. You're kidding. I wish. Get photos. Document everything. If she's operating machinery again, we'll get the county to shut it down. The next day, I went over with my phone ready, pretending to be friendly. Karen was there. Hair shorter, calmer posture, even wearing a clean white blouse instead of her usual HOA uniform. When she saw me, she smiled. A normal smile. Too normal. Daniel, she said pleasantly. How wonderful to see you again. Didn't think you'd be moving back, I said cautiously. I never left, she said. Just regroup. My new project is strictly commercial. Nothing to do with airflow. You can relax. I glanced at the turbines behind her. So what's all that? Energy research, she said smoothly. Sustainable design. You should be happy, really. I'm learning to use the wind, not fight it. I didn't believe a word. That evening, as the sun set, I saw faint blue lights blinking from behind her property. The turbines began to spin, not fast, but steady, rhythmic, like something pulsing in sync. A low hum rolled across the yards, subtle but constant. The neighbors noticed too. Alex texted, "Hey, you hear that? Thought she was banned from doing this stuff." I replied, "Different name, same obsession." The hum grew louder over the next few nights. My windows trembled slightly, not from force but resonance, like a sound you feel in your bones. Then I realized what she'd done. She wasn't trying to generate wind anymore. She was generating frequency. The next morning, I marched over. "Karen, turn them off." She didn't even look up from her tablet. "They're legal, Daniel. Fully compliant with decibel and safety regulations. They're rattling my house." "Then maybe your walls aren't as reinforced as you thought." I clenched my fists but stayed calm. "You're doing it again. You're escalating." She finally met my eyes. "No. I'm evolving." That night I couldn't sleep. The hum was faint but relentless, a mechanical lullaby that wormed into my head. Around midnight, the power flickered, and I saw a flash of movement outside my window, something spinning in the darkness. The next morning, the news broke. A small drone had crashed in the next neighborhood over, bearing a tag that read Lutz Energy Systems. The report said it had been testing microturbine airflow synchronization. When I read that, I laughed, but it wasn't the amused kind of laugh. It was hollow. Greg came over in person this time. She's rebranding herself, he said. Trying to turn her obsession into a legitimate enterprise. You can't fight her like before, she's using the system now. So what do I do? Just let her build. For now, yes. But record everything. If she slips, we'll be ready. Days passed. The turbines multiplied, 10, then 15, small and silver, arranged in neat rows that shimmered under the afternoon sun. The sound was hypnotic, a low whir that seemed to blend into the wind itself. And strangely, it started attracting attention. A few local reporters showed up to interview her. She spoke eloquently this time, talking about clean air initiatives and restorative energy independence. You'd never know she'd once declared war on the weather. The coverage was positive. Too positive. She's rewriting her own story, I told Alex. Yeah, he said, and half the town's buying it. Karen started hosting community demonstrations. People came, clapping politely as she explained airflow redirection as an eco-friendly power source. Kids got stickers that said, "Wind works for everyone." It was infuriating and brilliant. For weeks I stewed. Greg kept reminding me to stay calm, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen was winning again, not through force, but through reinvention. Then, one night, fate intervened. A freak thunderstorm rolled through, sharp and fast. Lightning cracked across the sky, and I watched through the rain as one bolt struck dangerously close to her turbines. The grid flickered, and seconds later, one of her devices caught fire, sparks spraying like fireworks. By the time the fire trucks arrived, 3 units were ablaze. The firefighters worked quickly, but the smoke drifted straight into the sky, thick and black. When it was over, Karen stood in the rain, drenched and trembling. One firefighter patted her shoulder. "Ma'am, these units weren't grounded properly. You're lucky it didn't spread." Her voice broke for the first time. It wasn't supposed to end like this. Something in me softened then, not pity exactly, but understanding. For months I'd seen her as a villain, a bureaucratic monster, a force of chaos. But now, standing there amid the ruin of her own obsession, she looked small. Human. The next day, her property was cordoned off for investigation. She didn't fight it. She didn't rebuild. She just packed what she could and left, quietly, without ceremony. Weeks later, I received one last envelope. Inside was a single photo, her standing beside one of her turbines before it burned, smiling softly. On the back, she'd written, "Maybe I tried too hard to control the wind. Maybe I just wanted to be part of it." I don't know why, but I kept the photo. Months passed. The neighborhood healed. Grass grew over the scorched ground. The laughter came back. People moved on. Sometimes, when I walk past the spot where her machines once stood, I still hear that faint hum. Not real, just memory. A reminder that some people can't live without control, even when it destroys them. And every now and then, when a strong gust rolls down the street and shakes the trees, I smile. Because I like to imagine that somewhere out there, in some open field far from us all, Karen's standing in the wind again, arms spread, eyes closed, letting it move her instead of fighting it. And this time, finally, it's quiet.